This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 216. Should we really close the door to labour mobility?
Well, perhaps right now the idea of moving to a different country to find work is furthest from anyone's mind. But when times are good in richer countries, people don't want to do the difficult jobs, the ones where you have to work hard and get paid less. We leave that for the migrants who either come over here to live or come over for a season. Aside from sounding a little exploitative, is it actually good for the economy to have that happen or not? Does it make the economy more productive, or is the preponderance of low-paid workers actually slowing down consumption? We'll look at all of that today on the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. So one of the reasons, Steve, given for Brexit was to take back control of our borders. And of course, that has been that line has been a vote winner for lots of governments. You know, John Howard used it in Australia back 20 years ago when he said we are going to decide who comes to this country and what circumstances in which they come. And since then, asylum seekers have quickly become illegal immigrants just about everywhere. The catch cry for the last UK election was also taking back control. And migrants are, of course, we know, responsible for all crime in this country and everywhere else. They live on the dole. They go to the top of the queue for social housing. We see that all over social media. And leaving the EU is going to solve all of that because we'd have control of our borders in the UK, except for the one with Ireland, of course, which we want to control that border without actually having a border, which is a bit of a chink in the argument there. But what do you reckon would happen if we stopped all migration? If the people who are against migration got their way and you just said, right, if you're not in this country already, you're not coming in, what happens?
Well, actually, that's a different angle to the one I thought would be starting off on, which is the economic obsession with free movement of labour and capital. And
well, we'll tackle that too.
We'll tackle that, yeah. But if you look at the migrant thing, let's put this in context. I think there's absolutely no chance of that being successful because a major driver of migration right now is climate change. And I don't know if you probably saw the reports that somewhere in Iraq cracked a temperature of something, I think it was 52.8 degrees Celsius, and that somebody pointed out this is a couple of degrees below the temperature they reckon we should cook food at to kill coronavirus, and that's the temperature people are supposed to live in. That, of course, is temperature recorded in the shade, not in the actual direct sunlight, which should be even higher again. That's meaning that major parts of the world are going to be unlivable, and it really doesn't matter what you tell people. They're going to be leaving where they are. The migration
as asylum seekers, maybe as climate asylum seekers. Yeah. But if we at that aside, and I think that's a discussion for another day. If we just said, and let's treat asylum seekers maybe slightly separately. But if we just said, if you want to move here for work, we're not going to let you. We're going to be self-sufficient. Is it realistic for a country to think like that?
Well, I mean, I'll go back to one little twist about this, and we'll get to the question whether it's realistic or not on the road, and that is that's actually, if you actually said you can't move labour between countries and you topped it up with a second saying you can't move capital between countries, you'd actually reach the preconditions for economic theory to say free trade increases everybody's welfare, because that's what mainstream economics assumes in its models, that labour and capital are completely immobile between countries while goods are completely mobile. And the reason they make that assumption is that with that assumption, you have any increase in economic activity due to exports accruing to what they call factors of production in that economy, and therefore you can say that the welfare benefits of trade accrue to local capital and local labour. If you actually allow that labour and capital are mobile, and particularly capital, and in terms of financial capital is mobile between countries, so the ownership of resources moves, but also labour moves around immensely, you can no longer say that free trade will benefit the factors of production, inverted commas, the workers workers and the capitalists in that particular country. So ironically, there's a reason that the economists, strictly speaking, if they wanted to make the real world look like their model, would say let's ban movement of people between countries.
Okay, so because what you're saying is that, okay, if you're going to have free trade, then you've got to assume that nothing else moves. So, but in reality, if you are selling something to another country and it's actually cheaper to make it in that country, then in reality you're probably going to make it in that country. You're going to move your investment, your machinery into that country to operate there.
Yeah, if you go right back and read Ricardo and Smith, they both encountered arguments, 200 and something years ago, saying that if we allow free movement of goods between countries, then why won't capitalists in England move to, at that stage, I think they were using the Netherlands as an example at Smith's time, and Portugal as an example in Ricardo's time. They'd move production to there, take advantage of cheaper labour, and we'd be screwed. We wouldn't have any benefits at all. And the famous phrase about Smith talking about motivation by the invisible hand, it wasn't the invisible hand of the market at all. It was the desire of English capitalists to remain in the English countryside, and therefore that's the invisible hand would stop them moving across the border to the Netherlands. Now, of course, that's completely not how it's been interpreted by mainstream economists. But what we have in reality is huge movement of people between countries. And even though it obscures the case they make in favour of free trade, there is as much in favour of free movement of people as they are in favour of free trade.
Well, you look at it one way. I mean, those people are the machines, aren't they? They in some cases they're very low cost machines. At least the ones that we're importing are.
Yeah, I mean that's if you look at why did industrialisation occur first of all in Scotland rather than, for example, France? One of the reasons is that wages were higher in Scotland, and it was therefore advantageous for innovators in Scotland to develop technology which replaced labour, and that's a major reason for why you got the growth in
Maybe that wouldn't happen now, though. Maybe in Scotland they would be importing a lot of people from Poland, and that wouldn't have happened because they'd be working.
Yeah. So that's the perspective that you actually get an innovation out of high labour costs, and one of the reasons to allow labour moving between countries is to exploit the advantages of for the capitalists of low labour costs. That puts me in a rather different camp. A lot of progressive economists are pro free movement of people because they sort of you should be able to move where you want to, a sort of libertarian left attitude. I'm actually rather more sceptical. I think that a lot of this movement is people being pushed out of places where they're being displaced and exploited where they arrive. I still think...
Yeah, although a lot of people are just coming here for work, aren't they? And maybe that's part of that displacement. But a lot of them are coming here also with a job. I mean, so last year, 677,000 people moved to the UK, and about a third of that was for a job, a third of it was to study, and the other third was a mix of reasons. But a chunk of that was accompanying someone who was either coming here to work or someone who was coming here to study. So that says to me 2/3 of those people are contributing to society, either because they're working and paying taxes or they're paying to study. If you get rid of them, then can we really say society is going to be better off?
Well, it's a mix both ways. I mean, I was obviously in one of the examples in 2014 of an Australian moving to the UK, and I know I've got some criticism of my capacities as a manager, which I completely accept at Kingston University, but I think I contributed something to the UK, so I can see that as a positive. I actually when I look at it, I didn't take a wage cut because University of Western Sydney retrenched 30% of its humanities staff, including me, so I was going from no wage at all. Actually, I was being paid by Rupert Murdoch at the time, to a decent wage in the UK. So I benefited as well. But at the same time, I think of my cleaner when I was over in the UK, and every week I had a young Russian woman turning up and cleaning my apartment for this princely sum of £7 an hour. And I, for the life of me, couldn't work out how anybody could survive on £7, so I normally paid about 10. But there are a huge number of people who are living from displaced conditions where they move to the west, and they're being exploited with pathetic wages, and as you say, with wages that cheap, why innovate a new vacuum cleaner to do the cleaning? So that's one of my worries about this.
That Steve Keen actually tidies up his flat by himself.
That is a good one. Yeah.
That's quite extreme. But maybe this is.
I can go back to my past here, but let's leave that story out for a while. Yeah.
But so maybe this is why Priti Patel is saying that, in the UK we don't want those low-paid workers. A lot of low-paid workers in the UK don't want low-paid workers either, because they're asking for less money. But Priti Patel is introducing this point system for the UK, like in Australia. 70 points you've got to have. The first 50 basically says you've got to have a job that's been approved by a sponsor, a job at an appropriate skill level as well, and you've got to have a reasonable standard of English. You have to have those, and then you need another 20, for which it's going to be the salary unless they've got a PhD, and that means you've got to earn over £25,600. So basically, to come here now, from the end of the year, you're going to have a job, an approved job, and the job has got to pay more than £25,600. And that is going to cut out the vast majority of people moving to this country, I'd suggest.
I think, that's one of the problems. The Tories put forward rules like this without ever checking, it seems, to see what the wage rates are, because I'm pretty certain a first-year school teacher gets less than $25,000 in the UK. And a nurse, so they put these things up, and they then prevent the people they desperately need, because they don't pay anybody locally well enough to get them to take on those high-skilled and low-paid jobs. So they drag migrants in to do it instead. And I look at that and think, don't you even read your own statistics? So I certainly have my problems with that. But this is. The fact that this happens...
But is there a problem with taking those low-paid workers from overseas? I mean, that's the more fundamental question. If we, and it's very easy, isn't it, to say, well, it has the thinking being, well, we don't need to train people to work in the NHS because we can get people from overseas where perhaps they've already been trained, or certainly they're going to take less money when they come here. So is it fine to do that, or should we be saying no, it's got to be done by British people? But then what if the British people don't? There's not enough of them want to do it because we're a wealthy country and would rather be doing something else that doesn't get our hands so dirty.
Well, in fact, that applies to sanitation jobs and that sort of thing, definitely. But school teachers and nurses, it shows the extent to which working class wages are simply too low in the UK in particular. I mean, and right up to middle executive level wages, they are the standard of living of people in the UK is a lot lower than the impression given by calling the UK a developed economy. I don't, as I said, I look at the cost of living in the UK and looked at the wages being earned by people like first-year art teachers and nurses and think, how on earth can anybody afford to live on that? What sort of conditions are you going to have to tolerate in terms of where you rent, what you buy for food and so on, to be able to survive on those wages? And what I think a large part of that is why UK, the words UK and innovation are connected by a few government documents, but not by reality. And I've got a feeling that following this low wage and bring cheap labour in when we can't get our locals to work for that rate as well is a large part of why the UK ceased being an innovationist society at least about 30 or 40 years ago.
You might have to take those words back if we do find that the UK provides the cure for COVID-19, of course. But I mean, that is a small group of people working in a very specific field, isn't it? I take your point. So is the answer then to say, well, okay, we need to push up minimum wage? Maybe you do need to earn over £25,600 because that's what everyone is going to earn. That's sort of going to be the minimum wage in the UK, and more people then would be prepared to do some of those jobs that we're shipping in low-paid workers for.
Pardon the background noise from the streets of Bangkok here in terms of the recording. Yeah, I think that if you think about how migration policy has been driven for the last 40 years, it really has been driven by the interests of employers and not by the interests of workers. And I've had a long history with following migration developments in Australia because at school most of my friends were the new migrants. I had a lot of Aussie mates as well, but I had Sri Lankan, Lebanese, Italian, Greek, friends at that stage. And in terms of the benefits we got out of that period, the society was immensely richer courtesy of that migration. Australia from being for very boring, basically England with heat, to an interesting part of the world with a fascinating culture. So that those migration waves certainly helped. And when you look at what was driving the migration, it was partly the desire to industrialise the country. So you had the Snowy Mountain scheme. You even had building cyclotrons to bring Sir Mark Oliphant back home. So a huge, to construct a viable economy approach. But over time, it got turned to keep wages down. And rather than family reunion being a major part of the migration policy, it became skilled labour. So all this stuff has been twisted to benefit the employers and screw the workers. And I think the same thing is happening in the UK. If migration meant what it did when I was in my teens, and that was letting people escape war-torn Europe, trying to industrialise the economy, build an industrial sector at the same time, then I'd be in favour of that migration. But what it's turned into, I would rather say let's minimise it, let's cut it down, and then get ready for the next stage. When we talked about a moment ago, we're going to get massive climate refugees coming our way, and it's our own damn fault, and we should be letting them into the country.
Right, but people are coming. So the net migration to the UK is about 250,000. So and of those, 76% are coming with a job already in hand. Only 52,000 are coming here each year looking for work, and that's basically halved since the EU referendum in 2016, because people know that they're not going to be able to stay here looking for a job. So most people are coming with a job in place. But that, I have no idea how many of them are low-skilled, low-paid jobs. But you'd imagine a significant proportion of that is the case. So with Priti Patel's new rules, then you're going to see that number decrease significantly. So the only way is going to be that people have to accept that things are going to be more expensive, because they are going to be done by people who are demanding higher wages, local people who are going to demand higher wages.
Partially, but also that's what drives you to find ways to minimise your costs by improving your industrial processes. And, like in terms of that, Japanese workers have seen their wages rise, and the goods that they can afford, not necessarily get cheaper, but more affordable within their wages, and certainly higher quality. So the whole focus on cost of production and getting a minimum cost in, which says let's bring in cheap labour to make a higher profit and so on. That's allocating the resources you currently have at a point in time perspective. My perspective on how capitalism actually got to be as strong as it is was development over time. You started off with low cost, low quality technology. You improve both over time. It's development that gets you improved standard of living, not specialisation. And this whole focus on let's move workers from one part of the world to the other is frequently driven by the specialisation argument rather than the development argument.
So if we look at fruit picking as an example, because there's a very seasonal job, the British Summer Fruits Association is now campaigning to get people to pick for Britain because there aren't enough pickers and packers, and they say it's because of COVID, but also because next year there's just going to be no overseas workers unless Priti Patel changes their rules. I mean, so should we use itinerant workers to do jobs like this, or should a country be self-sufficient? And is this an example of where you need mechanisation? Because in Britain there's over 250 million tonnes of soft fruits consumed each year, mainly strawberries and raspberries, and this is actually a large proportion of actually the fruit that Brits eat. So it's actually something healthy. So we don't want to lose that, because it's actually something healthy going into Britain's mouths rather than McDonald's and overcooked sausages. It would be a real problem if we lost this industry. Britain without strawberries in summer, can you imagine? But can you automate it, or do we just have to pay a lot more for them?
Well, you can also improve your production processes. Like a trip to the Netherlands would benefit a lot of English farmers to see how it's effectively a form of industrialised farming, farming in greenhouses and so on, with controlled water inputs, with no need for pesticide and less fertiliser as well, has led to a higher level of output. So you have to consider ways of improving your manufacturing processes, including in agriculture, especially in agriculture, given how wasteful and polluting a lot of agriculture is. So it's feasible to hang on to that industry while not needing cheap labour to come and do the picking, because you've changed your processes and taken the manufacturing inside greenhouses and so on to do it. I don't think you need to. My overall, you can feel a very strong reluctance about bringing in cheap labour to do jobs that locals won't do, which ends up undermining the wages locals do get for doing skilled jobs later on.
Right. But if it can't be mechanised, what do you do? I mean, if you just say, well, okay, we're going to hold our guns on this. We're still not going to let people in because we don't want them to upset to skew the income, the average income in the country. Do you just say, well, okay, we won't eat strawberries then?
Again, I said improve the manufacturing process of producing the strawberries in the first place. One little incident in human history that a lot of people aren't aware of, that I was very conscious of, occurred when I was running what's called the Ideas Centre, of all things, for the Freedom from Hunger campaign in Australia. And it was when Lee Kuan Yew was running Singapore. And one day, I think virtually without warning, he said all wages are increased by minimum wage increased by 27%. Now, partly that was to drive cheap Malaysian labour out of Singapore, but part of his attitude was as well, I want China and Singapore to be a high income, high skilled, industrialised economy, and if you can't compete with the 27% wage rise, then I want you to shut down. And fast forward 30, 40 years, Singapore's done rather well out of attitudes like that. And that's put the emphasis upon high standard of living for the majority of the population. And the same thing applied back in Australia during the 50s and 60s. The twist to make it about low wage costs and bring in cheap labour from overseas, and then we benefit as consumers, I think that's giving to the sort of stagnant economy that the UK has turned into, and Australia as well by its attitudes. For that matter, America too, with relying upon cheap Mexican labour and not even giving them citizenship rights. Yeah, and therefore them not having to apply minimum wages or any sorts of regulations. They just fly under the radar for whatever the employer can get away with. But Australia, of course, has mastered fly-in, fly-out workers as well to circumvent the restrictions on migration. You can get a special visa. In 2015, Fortescue Metals said they could save $33 million a year if they converted 330 workers from being residential workers to first-in, first-out workers. So most people in Australia probably wouldn't want those jobs, but they want mining companies to make big profits because they obviously want to share in those profits through their pension funds. So there wasn't a lot of opposition to this idea, was there? Well, I think the whole capacity of the labour movement to fight for a decent standard of living has been crucified in the last 30 or 40 years in general, and they're fighting on so many fronts, including fighting on this whole idea of, what are they were 470 visas, weren't they? They were called, and they weren't necessarily low-cost workers either. They were getting paid reasonably well. It's just the idea that if you've got people who are working for a while, because of course, if you move to a mining area and it's only there for a few years perhaps before everything moves on, then it's a transient life, and most Australians wouldn't want that transient life. And if you can get it from overseas, even if it's a well-paid job, again, isn't the choice? Well, either you do that or you don't pursue, that particular opportunity unless you can mechanise it, which is your point. Yeah, but when you end up getting the increase in the profit share goes to Gina Reinhardt, which doesn't make me particularly happy. She's Australian.
It's staying in the country. It's.
I wouldn't be so sure about that, to me, the whole problem with migration is that it went from being something about helping people escape social devastation, which was the Second World War in Europe. Which was a huge amount of migration from that. The Irish potato famine, for that matter, many decades prior. The collapse of Vietnam and Cambodia after the American War there went belly up, and you also had the extent to which people coming from other cultures enriched the culture in which you yourself were living, and then a lot of migration was about family reunion, and it's absolute halcyon period. Australia's migration rules included a bias towards Africans because Africans are underrepresented in the overall population mix of the country. The social days of migration have gone, and it's all now about getting cheap workers in, screwing your own local workers by using cheap workers against them. And in any way, that's returned us back to the 19th century attitude that Australia again represented. As one of my favourite articles of all time was by a Macquarie University academic with a wonderful name of Marie de Leprevanche, and she went through looking at the politics of opposition to migration in Australia over a century, and she found that guess where the most opposition to the next wave of migration came from?
From the previous rate, the previous number of migrants. It's always been the case, hasn't it?
So, and that actually led to a sort of a right-wing shift in the overall society, which we're seeing writ large on the global stage now. So I'm in favour of people moving, travelling, bringing their skills to different locations and so on, as long as not being screwed for the sake of doing it, and they have been screwed. And that's why I've got my reluctance now.
Which minimum wage could, of course, help with if it was applied to everybody. What about seasonal jobs then? So I mentioned the British summer fruit. So fruit picking obviously is something that only happens in summer. If you had somebody who was just a fruit picker who lived here, what would they do? Would we be paying them for the unemployment benefit for the rest of the year? In which case, in effect, you're saying, well, okay, we are actually subsidising the summer fruits industry by paying for half the year for their workers.
Yeah, I mean, a whole lot of things like fruit picking is a classic example. It's one of those itinerant things that doesn't fit into blackboard economics of left or right persuasion. You have a job which is only there for a couple of months. You certainly can't expect to be relying upon that your entire year. I haven't done fruit picking. I've done a fair number of menial jobs over my student days, but not that one. But backbreaking as well. It's the sort of thing you would want people who are otherwise tourists to do, earning some money while they're here being tourists, and that's an argument in favour of itinerant labour.
Yeah. And I'll give you another example. So I've been in Newquay, down in Cornwall, one of the few places in Britain where they actually have waves. And there was a surf instructor, an English surf instructor, can you imagine? And so we were saying to him, so what do you do in the rest of the year? And he says, well, he's a ski instructor in the Alps in winter, but he's not sure whether he'll be able to do that. Is he going to be able to go and work in the EU from
because of COVID or because of the EU change?
No, because of the change with the EU, and short term obviously with COVID. So there's an example. Why shouldn't makes sense? He's got a variety of jobs. It's dependent on the season, so he moves around. It's the same as, for example, in Sydney, you'll see a lot of pommy buskers on the streets who it's actually worth their while flying down to Australia to busk on the streets of Sydney. The airfare more than pays for the amount of money they get, because obviously you can't busk at Covent Garden when it's snowing. So there's lots of, and I'm sure travelling actors, all sorts of professions where people move around the world. And you don't want to stop that sort of thing happening.
No, and that's. I have friends who work in ski instructing and so on, and they exactly what you've said. They teach surf, so they teach surfboard riding during summer in Sydney. They'll go often do ski instructing in Canada during the winter, and you don't have those. You're only in a country which is permanently frozen are you going to get the opportunity to do that as a year-round employment. So you do want the itinerants to be feasible, and you want them to earn a decent wage and to have the chance for a decent lifestyle as well. I certainly know from my stories of my friends in ski instructing, they have a pretty enjoyable lifestyle, which is only the young can enjoy it. So good luck to them while they can.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm not quite sure what these people do when they reach 40 or 50, but as you say, good luck to them. So, but we don't want to stop that happening. So that gets back to Priti Patel's point. Do we say, well, okay, if you're going to come over here, you've got to earn a certain amount of money, and but within that, perhaps you do allow. You say, well, okay, we do need some itinerant labour. There's certain things that just need to be done seasonally, but again, we're going to demand that there's a minimum salary, so that that is going to encourage automation where it's possible from the owner's point of vieue.
And also not undermine the wages.
We still need those fruits picked.
And also not undermine the wages of local workers. And it's shifting the orientation towards benefiting the majority of the people rather than the employers. That's what under those situations, I'm quite happy to see a degree of migration, independent of what's going to happen with climate change, of course, which is far more serious issue for the future. But yeah, it's the fact that it's been turned around in favour of employers, and mainstream economists have done a lot of the championing of that in a world where they oppose minimum wages, which mean, of course, the impact of bringing in the overseas workers is to drive down wages for the local workers, and you then get the level of racial antagonism coming out of that as well, that of course you would have also seen in the UK. It's often the local working class who are angry about the Polish migrants coming in, etc., etc. It's the employers who benefit because they pay them lower wages. Well,
there's a bit of that going on in Australia as well, of course, isn't there? There was was that line from the Edinburgh Fringe Festival I heard where somebody it was an English comedian saying, racism is like cricket. I mean, England invented it, but it took Australia to really perfect it.
I'll pay that one.
So what do we want then out of all of this? Do we want skilled workers or unskilled workers if you have people coming into the country? In other words, do you want the low-paid jobs done by migrants, or do you want the high-paid jobs done by migrants, which then frees up the local population to do all those low-paid jobs? You don't want that, do you?
No, but I think you want a degree of mobility of labour for the itinerant positions you mentioned, which were a given. They're going to be there all the time, and you want those people to move around the globe if it was feasible to do so and take on the itinerant jobs. You want people with a skill set that doesn't exist locally and can't be generated locally to come in from overseas. You don't want that undermining local working conditions and local living conditions. So but what's actually happened historically is that migration has been distorted to benefit rather than letting people get out of parts of the world which have suffered trauma, like Europe in the Second World War. It's ended up being let's exploit wage differentials and pay people lousy wages to be cleaners, and bump up the wages of the finance sector. Right.
So again, it gets back to, well, okay, let's set a minimum wage, and then you need a transition plan, don't you? So because we can't stop, for example, care workers coming to the UK from December and assume that all of a sudden, because I think about a third of or more of people working in the healthcare industry are from overseas. We can't just stop those people coming in without a plan for them to be replaced by local labour, which obviously means more local training, which is like a 10-year cycle at least, isn't it?
Yeah,
you've got to have some sort of transition strategy.
And you've got to have the capacity to train people in areas like, for example, nursing, to replace the fact that you're not getting as many as migrants from overseas. So it's but all these things, like education itself has been turned into a profit centre. And so all these things undermine the type of migration you and I'd like to see.
So why are countries so naive they don't see what China is doing with its Belt and Road Initiative, which is pretty much, well, we will invest in a country, but we're also going to send our workers overseas, so that so the benefit of that employment is going right back to China. You'd assume, at least with migrant workers, they're going to pay tax and buy food in your country, in the UK. But with this Belt and Road Initiative, even that's not happening.
Yeah, I know. So, but what the countries that are receiving that are looking at is the infrastructure that's being constructed, and arguing they're sort of getting it's like getting IKEA coming out and not just sending you the flat pack, but assembling them as well. That's the orientation they have in favour of it. But what China is doing is extending the benefits of, successfully exploiting modern monetary theory to keep Chinese workers fully employed
all over the world, and extending that influence all over the world,
all over the planet.
Absolutely,
scary
stuff. All right, very good. We'll catch you again very soon. We'll sort of talk more actually next week about the EU. And that relates a little bit to migration, but now Britain's out of it. I want to ask the question: are we getting out of it at precisely the wrong time? Could this be the EU's day? I think I know the answer to that already, but we'll have an interesting time discussing it. We'll see you next week.
Okay, Matt. Bye.
So there we are. There was another interesting one. Yes, and that's it. I'm Phil Dobbie, back again with Steve Keen for another one next week. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.